Jeff, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, of course, Ivan. I'm excited to
Before
talk to you.
before we dive into what you deem essential in order to search for the ideal esport program, okay? Can you make a brief introduction about yourself, and also how did you end up in the position that you are currently on?
Yeah, of course. My name is Jeff Shell. I'm the esports director at East Tennessee State University. I have been involved in esports in some capacity since I was a freshman in college. Um, Maybe a little bit before that, if we consider, running a Dota club and sneaking into the school library in high school after hours to be involved in esports. But so I got my start in student leadership. And just being involved in helping getting the first esports club here on ETSU's campus up and running. And from that we grew it into a pretty big, League of Legends community and really kind of helped our campus grow um, the esports scene in general. And now we have a thriving campus with a lot of interest in gaming, a lot of interest in esports, even outside of our varsity program. And so I was incredibly honored and thrilled when I got the invitation in 2019 to come back home to ETSU and help build the varsity esports program out from scratch. And so I've been here for 6 years now, getting close to seven. And then before that, I was previously at King University. And so this is getting close to marking my 8th year in college esports.
Amazing, amazing. And you guys fall under the computer science department, is
Yeah,
that
so
right?
we so we
Yeah.
fall under information technology services. So
Okay.
we're like the we're under the like help desk and like cybersecurity,
Okay.
networking, all of that stuff. Like the business part of IT that keeps the university running. That's where our program is housed under. It's a very unique place to be housed under, but it's also I think it's fantastic because I've never once had to explain to a supervisor or a colleague like why we're buying, $5,000-$6,000 computers. They understand that we need, the best of the best when it comes to equipment. And it's a lot easier of a conversation to have when you're talking to someone that's worked in IT their whole life, as opposed to maybe someone that works in student life or athletics who may not really understand, some of the things that go behind keeping an esports program running.
Amazing. And was it like you that proposed the school, or did the school call you to, be a
Yeah,
manager?
yeah. So I think back in the day, which makes me sound incredibly old. When we were running the esports club and the League of Legends
Mhm.
club subsequently on campus, we tried our best to put a lot of pressure into being like, hey, how can we make this, you know, a more legitimate aspect of the university than just a student organization? But at the time, like 2012, 2013, college esports was very much at its infancy. It was still very, grassroots. And so, the vision just wasn't quite there for what college esports was going to become very shortly after that. And so we were never really able to get the varsity program aspect of it off the ground. But, through continued student leadership, as classes changed and more students came in and really grew this community here on campus. We've just had overwhelming pressure from the students, to really show that esports is something that they valued, it's something that they cared about. And, eventually the administration took notice. And that was when, they launched the task force to start building out the bones of the esports program. And then at
Mhm.
that point, that was when I was approached because of my position at King University, and I'm local to the area. They had just reached out to ask some questions, and then the way I like to lovingly and jokingly put it is that they've held me hostage since then and haven't let me leave. But it's a good situation to be in because I do truly love this school. I think our school does a very important thing for our community here in the Appalachian Highlands, and so there's no place I'd rather be to help build it up.
Amazing, amazing. And I want to focus this talk, okay, as if you were like a senior high schooler and you were searching for a collegiate esports program. Because usually students, hear my perspective or like the team perspective at this portion, but usually like I would love, to hear like your perspective in like what do you consider, like you've been since 2019, right, in the
Yeah.
collegiate esports scene, so you've seen quite a bit. So like I would love to know like your perspective in like as a high school um as a senior high schooler, like what would be like one main factor that you would consider when looking for a collegiate esports program?
Yeah, of course. I think we do a lot of work in our local area with high school programs, and especially
Hmm.
middle school programs as well. So this is a conversation I have with a lot of students. And I will use my life as a testament to this. That first and foremost, when you're considering options in education, like financials is a very important aspect of it. Um,
Hmm.
as someone that is still paying student loans off and will probably be paying them off for the foreseeable future, um, I think being able to not only get a quality education but to get an affordable education is very important. Um, especially with how competitive the job market is now. Um, when looking at universities, like cost is king in a lot of aspects, and I think it really is in education as well. Because a lot of the times as our education system is growing, the quality of the degrees that you're getting at one school compared to another are somewhat equal a lot of the times, unless you're like going into hyper specific programs. um, and so really, first and foremost, just making sure that you've got a good affordable option. um, and for esports specifically, I think that means like you're doing a little bit of your due diligence to understand the actual cost of attendance to the school that you're going at, considering esports scholarships, like offers and things like that, and not just like that final number, right? Like what are you going to have to pay to get here, and as opposed to just saying, I XYZ school said, hey, we're going to give you $20,000 to come play esports at our small Division 3 school, um, where we don't have much of a community or campus. And then you find out, oh, the school costs $40,000 to go here, so I'm not even getting half of my tuition covered. And now I've got to scramble to come up with that. And I think especially for like graduating seniors in high school, that can be kind of a hard thing to honestly overlook, because it's very easy to go, this number is bigger, how can it not be better, before really kind of taking into like account that full picture and like what you're actually going to have to pay at the end of the day. It's a trend that like I've seen less and less as esports at the college level is maturing. Is
Hmm.
there's more and more parents involved in the process. There's more and more just like people that these students trust, that are helping look out for them and helping them kind of understand, it's like, hey, this school may be offering you $20,000 to come here, but it's going to cost you another 30,000 to get there, as opposed to, hey, this school's offering you 3,000 and you're going to have to pay $2,000 to get the rest of the way here, and really just helping those students understand that balance.
Yeah.
And that's, like I said, it's a very personal thing for me, because as someone that took a lot of student loans and also, you know, and now stuck paying them off, it's like I wish that I had done things differently when I went through the first time, to really help make sure that I had the financial aspect of things. Um, and so, I think that is first and foremost the most important thing, is just really making sure that the education is affordable for you.
Yeah. What you mentioned is very important, especially for international students. If domestic students are having, like this, sometimes not understanding the financials, imagine an international student when they're like, yeah, they offered this amount of scholarship and I have to pay this, but okay, this tuition, but like, what about housing, food? And then they're like, the hidden fees, and then the medical insurance, and so like it's very important, to put up this is the budget, that you're gonna have to end up paying because like uh, t- for them to get loans, it's way more difficult than domestic students. So like having clear knowledge of like all the costs involved and ending up like what's going to be my yearly budget is super important. And besides financial, what other aspect have you found that students kind of have a hard time to understand because it's complex or sometimes it can be misleading
Yeah, I
besides
think
financials?
yeah, yeah, like I said, financials is definitely not the flashy answer. And I think my
Yeah.
answer to this might not be that flashy either, but there's just, and it's harder for international students to kind of access this, and so it really requires programs to be very open and transparent when speaking with international students, especially like, but like just the little things about the program, like the team culture,
Mhm.
are when you come by to visit campus, or you speak to another student inside of the program, how are they speaking about, their teammates? How are they speaking about how things are ran? Do people genuinely seem happy to be involved? We've ran into situations in the past where we've had, transfer students come in and, within a couple of weeks, the first thing that they say is, I didn't realize that an esports team could be like this, like I didn't know that it could be like a community. I didn't know that it could be, a place where we felt warm and welcome, or we just didn't feel stressed out. Like there was, something always on our shoulder to, like win, 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 win. And like being able to understand that there are ways to do that in like a healthy and comfortable environment, and one that's not super high stress. And that's one that's much easier for domestic students to find, because it's a little bit easier for them to access campus tours. And so typically, like if you're speaking to me or someone in my position, I think it's, a really good idea to just ask, like, hey, is there a player that I could, reach out to find out some more things? Usually I've send a player to students that I talk to as well, just because they're going to have, a little bit more of a honest, I wouldn't say honest, but less biased perspective of how the program's running, because I think as humans, it's sometimes hard to recognize where, we may have some failures or where we could do better, but the students really have their pulse to the ground about what works well for them, what isn't working well for them. Um, and then this one is just a little bonus addition to the little things, but like the esports facility itself,
Mhm.
um, like things like desk size, things like, is your, like the quality of the chairs that you have. That's one of the things I'm personally very proud of, that we have our chairs. We have nice noble chairs from Germany. They have been in the program now since it started, and when you walk in our arena, you would not believe that they are almost 8-year-old chairs. Well, 7-year-old chairs, but just because of how well they're taken care of, how well they hold up, things like that. It always hurts my heart a little bit when I see a new esports program like starting, and you see the first picture of their facility, and you just see like the cheapest chair imaginable, and it's like, for these students, this is their running shoes in a sense, and so like, a track and field player wouldn't come out with like, the cheapest shoes that they could get just because that's what they had. And so we, really try to emulate that. But things like desk size as well, right? Like I've seen, you see, sometimes you'll see facilities where it's like, oh, I'm in on this tiny little cramped desk, and I if you're a Valorant player, I know you're not using too much of your desk for your keyboard anyway because of how you hold it. But even then, like just having that like free and available space for you to, really not put undue strain on your arm, because now you're having to like compensate and use your wrist more because you don't have full range of motion in your arm and things like that. Um, you know, and just like also just understanding that, like getting a good understanding of like the PCs in the arena as well, because for most students, and I would imagine every international student, you're probably not coming to campus with a computer that's going to be in your dorm room or your house. You may get one once you're here, but when you initially arrive, like that is kind of going to be the setup that you're, for lack of better term, stuck on. And so really, those are really good questions to ask programs to kind of help understand, if things are going to make a lot of sense on the esports side of things, because you don't want to get somewhere and then find out that, like, oh, we've got 2000 series cards with 8 gigabytes of RAM, and the monitors are 140 refresh rate. And that can be, thankfully, I think not many programs have, computers that are like that low anymore, so it's becoming less of a landmine. But definitely in the beginning, there were definitely some landmines of like places you could end up when with the kinds of computers that they had.
Interesting how you describe the small details, which is what the students really, that's what they basically fixate on, so yeah. And another thing so you mentioned a couple things, and I'm gonna them down. First of all, the team culture. Okay, how, as a high school senior, can you identify those programs that are like invested in that player development instead of like building a roster and that short term win, and maybe in 2 years, the thing disappears because it's not very structured. How can you
Yeah.
identify that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's easier to do that um, with top level programs that have accumulated enough points through events to get things like Liquipedia pages or records on VLR and things like that. Really like getting historical data about these teams and being able to look and see, hey, is there a lot of roster turnover on this team? And then when you see, you know, there's a team where two-thirds of the roster is changing every year, or three-fifths of the roster is changing every year. Like that's usually like step one if I was a high school student to make me go, I wonder why, right? And then you can dig into the why, right? And you may look and it may be, hey, three people on this Valorant team left because they went pro, right? And they said, I'm just going to focus on pro now. I've hit my ultimate goal that I didn't think I was going to hit right out the gate. And it's hard to balance both. And I'm going to choose pro over college right now, and that's perfectly fine. But then, sometimes when you're digging, what you may find is that students left because a lot of things didn't make sense for them. And then you'll see, like, oh, three students left here, and now they're all like separately at different schools. Like they didn't even try to go somewhere together. And stuff like that. It's like I said, it's a lot of little things, and it's finding that
Hmm.
historical data about teams and kind of really just seeing and understanding, like, do they have consistent rosters over the year? What happens if, they have a roster improvement between semesters, right? Like what happens to that sixth man out, that fourth man out, right? Like how is that person being treated, right? Because I think it's pretty easy in all aspects of esports for students and players to understand that, every year the younger kids are just getting better and better at the game. Especially I think Rocket League is one where a lot of players feel that stress of like,
Hmm.
hey, there's this 14-year-old kid right now, and if he was old enough to go pro, nobody would have a chance anymore. Stuff like that. And so really just kind of seeing like through that historical data, like what happens when a team does make those roster upgrades, right? Like are they committing to making sure that the players that they brought here stay here, and whether that's building out an additional roster for them, you know helping them transition into like a coaching role or something like that, or whatever they can do to support those goals for those students. I think that's one of the, like, in terms of like what you can see from the outside without really being inside of it, those are some good indicators for kind of how the students are being treated inside of the team, and if that team culture really is improvement and investment mindset as opposed to just trying to get instant wins.
Hmm. Yeah, and especially this year, there's been a few like programs that the universities like let them out. Like I know maybe it's going a bit too technical, but like I think it's very important for like students going into the collegiate scene, because I don't remember the website, but there's a website that you can check the university financials and all that. But like as a senior high school, like what questions would you ask in order to know if the program structure is sustainable? It's I know it's difficult to tell, but like what red flags would you
Yeah.
advise students? Yeah,
Yeah, no, that's for a high school senior, that is going to be a very difficult question to
but
ask,
it's
and that
important.
it is
Yeah.
very important to understand, especially if you're an international student and you may not fully understand the scope of big picture what's happening with education in the United States, right? Like across the country right now, for years there has been this looming enrollment cliff, where every projection of data shows that schools are going to start dropping enrollment numbers, and when enrollment numbers drop, that's when budgets drop, and when budgets drop, that's when programs get cut. And so, like, one of the easiest, without having to get too into the weeds of it, things that you can do
Hmm.
when you're looking at these schools is just look at their enrollment numbers. Look at their, universities publish these numbers publicly. um they may lag a year or two behind just because it takes time to like process and publish that data. But and ask ask me, ask any other person in my position. Like, it's going to be a very memorable question for someone in my position. If a
Mhm.
student were to ask me, like, how is the historic enrollment doing at your university over the past couple of years? Like, that's going to, one, that's just going to make you stand out to everyone else. It's going to make you look a little bit
Yeah.
more invested. And that's one of the things I can say I'm very proud of here at ETSU is that we're not facing a looming enrollment cliff. We're actually growing faster than we can sometimes handle. We've had consecutive, if my memory serves me correctly, out of the last 5 years, we have had 4 years of consecutive um, student, like, new freshman class growth. And the one year that broke it up from being a full five streak, we missed the mark by two students, two incoming freshmen. And so, really just understanding, like, is the university growing in terms of the number of students that it's supporting? Is the school actually being attractive to students that want to come in and seek an education? That's one of the greatest ways that you can really get a rough idea about um, the sustainability of that university for the future. Typically, if the university at the top is sustainable and the esports program, is well supported by the university, monetarily, and as well as just like buy-in from the administration and believing in the mission of esports and what we
Mhm.
do, it's going to be a pretty safe bet that if the school looks bought in, and that the school is doing well financially in terms of enrollment, that you're probably coming into a pretty stable environment. um,
Okay.
and then if you really want to get into the weeds about it, because you're like that and you're a nerd like me, pretty much every public university will have they have streamed publicly available meetings of their board of trustees. And if you're
Mhm.
willing to sit through the, like, 2 hours long, of a boring policy meeting where people are giving updates about those kind of aspects, like, you can get really hard information, about how the school's being run from the back end, and get a lot of stuff that, like, might be harder to find if you're just doing some quick googling about schools, if that's something you're worried about.
Yeah. I mean, as my job, I do check the financials of universities,
Yeah.
and I'm very particular. But I don't expect a high school student
Yeah.
to do that. But like,
No,
yeah,
that's where the
it's
parents come in.
yeah. But the factor of like enrollment numbers, like checking the enrollment numbers, that's a very good one, and it's very simple, and it's online for a high school senior to, like, see the metrics. So amazing stuff. Okay, and also other things you mentioned. So like when choosing a program, like from your personal opinion or perspective, like how much should the choice be in terms of academics and esports? What's the balance? Okay, because like in your perspective, because some students are more in the competitive, but like at the end of the day they're also students first. So what is the balance from your perspective?
Yeah, my and and it's gonna sound a little joking, I guess, but I promise you it's dead serious. My perspective is that unless you've, already been at the top of tier two or have made tier one, um, or you have enough money that you're never going to have to worry about how you're going to take care of yourself for the rest of your life, that you should be like 75-25 academics to esports. um, it's sometimes it's a harsh realization for students to hear, but a lot of the time, once you're in your early to mid 20s, if you were going to go pro, you probably would have already done it. That's not to say that there aren't people who won't, break that mold through hard work and, an insane
Hmm.
amount of skill, for whatever reason. But, at the end of the day, esports is a tool, especially for these students that have gotten to those levels where they're just on the cusp, being in the bubble of being professional players. Esports is an amazing tool for you to set yourself up for the rest of your life. And, at the end of the day, how you're going to do that is with an education and with something that's going to give you an opportunity to have, a not even just a well-paying job, but a job that you enjoy. I've worked well-paying jobs that I didn't enjoy, and I was much more miserable than when I worked jobs that I enjoyed, where I made a lot less money. Um, and so, really, just making sure that the core like education that you're coming for is going to set you up for success. And, sometimes that can also look like having honest conversations with yourself about, what is the best goal for your financial future, in
Hmm.
terms of what you want to study, right? Like I had to have that hard conversation with myself when I was 19 years old, because I wanted to just get a history degree. And then I realized very shortly into college, after I started thinking about it, I was like, what actually am I going to do with a history degree? And that's no shame to the history majors out there. Y'all make it work, and you guys make it do. But when I looked at that situation, I was like, even though this is something I enjoy studying, is it something that like sets me up for the best success in life? And so that was when I had to start having hard conversations with myself about what I would enjoy doing. And then I changed my major 7 times. Um, because that's how it goes. But really, like it is so important to just make sure that you have a good grasp on the value of the degree that's being offered by the school. um, especially as AI is becoming more and more prevalent, in the workforce, like making sure that you're not getting a degree that's going to be undervalued because of the presence of AI. And I'm an AI skeptic, so maybe that's just my paranoid thoughts speaking. But just making sure that you understand that like the 4 years that you're spending investing in yourself and your education are gonna like pay dividends to you in the future. And it is not a bad thing to let going professional or making esports your career to be the secondary goal. I won't call it a backup plan. I'll say a secondary goal, right? When I wanted to work in esports, it was always the primary goal, but the reality of life is that it had to be the secondary goal, right? Like I had to, make sure that if it didn't work out, that I was at least set up, to be able to take care of myself and, live a happy and fulfilling life without this. And that was with someone that had aspirations of coaching, right? Not even aspirations of playing. For
Hmm.
people with aspirations of playing, all it takes is one, really bad injury, and then you can never play again. And so having that insurance, right? And for a lot of students, that's what the education is. It's an insurance policy against what happens if I don't go pro, what happens if I don't make this my career. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you're going to treat it any less seriously, or come in expecting to fail. But it's the same thing with health insurance. We don't have health insurance because we're like, oh, I'm going to get sick all the time, right? But it's there just in case you get sick. Like,
Yeah.
and for those students that are at that bubble, that's, I think, very important to that have a good quality degree, so that if your grand goals don't work out, you've still got something that you can come back to, that you're going to enjoy and is going to fulfill your life.
Yes, for sure. And a few points that you mentioned about academics, like I was outlining to students. Okay, on average, most the most like the highest scholarship you will get is usually the academic scholarship. There are those programs that are like, yeah, I'll give you like an amazing esports scholarship that will cover full tuition or part of your tuition, but most on average, if we generalize, are from academic scholarships. So like having a very strong GPA and stuff like can really help you in your financials when you go to university. So yeah, I I also agree with you. Also, on the AI part, I also, apart from running sports, I teach in a business school in Barcelona, Spain,
Hmm.
and oh my god, like as like changing the group activities, changing the material, like focusing on critical thinking, like the students just like rely on the AI, like instead of like thinking by themselves, it's just they type it on the AI, and when I ask them a question, they just read from their phone or the laptop the AI. And continually have to make activities to like make them
Yeah.
think for themselves. Like use AI, like everyone uses AI, but like like it's a double-edged sword. Like you need to know how to use it. At the end of the day, you are the human touch is what's
Yeah.
gonna
No, exactly. It's
differentiate
a
you.
tool.
All the work, all the information is gonna be the same. You know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the way I like to tell, and I like to tell my students as well, especially as because it's AI is not going away. You
Yeah.
tend what usually once we make things, they don't go away. And so it's understanding how to exist in a system with AI and not rely on it, especially when you may be like an upper level computer science class, and they're telling you, hey, what we're hearing from employers is that when you get here, you're going to be using these AI based tools. So we're going to teach you how to work and do good work with inside of AI, and not using that as a crutch, but rather using it, as a tool. Um, because I definitely I feel you on the critical thinking part. That's you know, not necessarily like it's like the sneaky side of college esports where, in addition to the lessons that we're learning about the games that we're playing, like what little things can I sneak in from my personal crusades. And for me personally, I think, the lack of like critical thinking education in especially the American public education system is rough
Hmm.
at times. I think, I thought that I knew how to think critically when I was in high school. I did competitive speech and debate. Like I thought I was pretty good at it. And then I got to college and I took my first philosophy class. And then I was like, oh, wow, I'm actually really bad at this. Right. And I was like, it's like I was just never set up for success. I was never set up to do that. And so a lot of, even how we're running the teams and how we're running, VOD reviews, scrims, practices. And, there's a lot of, places where I'm trying to implement ways to help students strengthen their critical thinking skills.
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, if that's all that a student that's here for 4 years gets out of this is that they won some games, of Valorant, Rocket League, Overwatch, whatever it may be, and that they learn to think just a little bit better and learn to like examine, themselves and the world in a little bit of a different light, then I think that I think that's a success case for our program.
Hmm. I want to ask you like a question just popped up with the last things you said about like developing skills and all that. Like, so I mean, it is very important, the university you choose because it has the degree you want to study and like the value, the academic value of the university. But it's as important, to ask the right questions, okay, to a head coach or an esports director about um, how can I build my portfolio of skills in the 4 years or the 2 years I'm doing a master's, right, on campus. So what key questions or what key question would you say, is important to ask the faculty in terms of like, am I going to be able to have a job on campus in the esports program in the broadcasting and production, or as a coach, or like on campus, whatever, like something that is related to the degree they want to study and also have a portfolio. Like, what are
Yeah.
the key questions?
Yeah, I think one of the key questions is really just starting by asking what's available, right?
Mm,
One really cool thing about our program that I love is that in addition to everything that we've built up on the competitive side, um, is that we've built up, a pretty strong core of like student production. And but through that, that's where we get a lot of students that have those opportunities where they want to find ways to strengthen their resume, strengthen some soft skills,
mhm,
or even just build out a portfolio and build out something that they can take with them. Um, and a lot of times we find those students because they want to be involved with the competitive aspect of the program, and you know they're a silver Andy or a gold Andy, and then they go, oh wait, never mind, your Rocket League team is all like 2200 plus MMR, right? It's like, why would I ever think that I could be on this team with the level that I'm at? But then they hear, oh, but you guys stream and you guys do marketing and you guys run events and things like that. Well, that's really funny because I'm a business major and I would love to get some hands-on experience with stuff like that. And so regardless of if it's esports or anything else that you want to be involved with on campus, the easiest way to find those opportunities to get that like hands-on real world experience, as stupid as it sounds, it's literally just ask. There are so many things going on university campuses that people never know about just because they're either, they're not marketed well, or it's, targeted at a very specific group of people. But, when talking to faculty about those programs and those opportunities, it's just very important to ask, like, hey, outside of the time that I'm here to study, outside of the time that I'm here to play esports, like what are other ways that I can get involved on campus? What are other ways that I can find those opportunities to help grow myself, because especially every year it's getting more so the case that just sitting in a classroom for 4 years and walking across the stage and getting a piece of paper isn't enough anymore. um
Yeah.
it's really all about what you can do to like build out like yourself as a person, and as well as be able to display that to a potential employer. When I was coming up through college, it was so much like at the end of high school, the emphasis was on like looking back at the time you were in high school and being like, hey, what are the things that you did that help make you stand out to a college admissions department, in terms of like extracurriculars or things that you can do where you can like display, hey, I've worked on and I've developed these soft skills that, you think is a good value to have in your student body here. So please accept me into your university. That's even more so the case once you're at a university and you're because now you're trying to impress employers and there's money on the line and they want the best of the best. And they'll more often than not they look at two equal people from the same university with the same degree, the same GPA. What's always going to stand out is like the little things that they did outside of just showing up to class. um,
Yeah.
and
Because
it can be as simple as I volunteered at the food pantry on campus, and I got to like learn about some logistics, and I got to learn about like helping people and doing stuff with that. I guess it doesn't always have to be this grand thing where, oh, I was involved in, I was the president of 15 clubs and I went on 10 study abroad trips while I was in college. It doesn't always have to be those big things. Sometimes it can just be those little things, like such as, hey, I for 4 years I was here and I ran the esports social media account. And so now I can show you with data, like, hey, this is the number of impressions I was able to produce for this university. This is the experience that I got. Like, look at the first graphic I made, and this is literally the last graphic I made the day I graduated, right? Like being able to have that. Um, and sometimes opportunities from that come that you would never expect. 2 years ago, our production team had the opportunity to take part in our university's week of giving, as the esports team was the featured unit. And every year, our university does a really big marketing push around that featured unit for the fundraising day. And so when we were chosen, the first thing I asked was, can my production students make the ad that will be played on television to promote us? And they were flabbergasted that like I would even suggest that. In the beginning, like they loved the idea because it was just like, no one's ever really asked to use this as an opportunity to like provide something for students that they can walk away from. And I have one alum right now who she literally came in last week to see me to tell me that she just got a job at a TV studio here in town, and she was the producer and the director on that video. And that was the thing that was at the top of her resume under extracurriculars, was that I got to develop, direct, produce this TV commercial that was ran, on local and state television for, that entire month. Um, and so it is sometimes those little things that you don't think are going to be a big deal because you got involved with a club, or like you stayed over and helped the professor with something that turned into something that will just be the reason that you get the job that you want.
yeah, because an employer at the end of the day is interested in like, do you have the skills and the knowledge to do what it takes to be hired for this job position, and all the stuff that you make in university, develops you to that potential opportunity. So, yeah, amazing. Jeff, to wrap this up, how would you finish this sentence? Collegiate esports is
Thriving.
thriving.
I think there's a lot of uncertainty, with programs closing and everything like that. But when I talk to every student, whether they're involved in my program at the varsity level, whether they're involved with our club here on campus, whether they're just the O tour that shows up to our Smash locals that the team runs, or whether I'm talking to students at other schools, every time I talk to students, what students are telling me is that every year this feels like it's getting bigger and better. And it's hard sometimes from an administrative point of view to see that, because it's easy to see some doom and gloom or hear what other people like in my position are, talk about the stresses of the job and things like that. But when I talk to students, what I hear is I just see nothing but very passionate students that are really taking the reins inside of their programs to help, grow the scene, help grow things. And they're the group of young people that are coming up under us right now are going to put a whole lot of people in my position with my job, going to put a lot of fear in us, because they're very passionate about the future of college esports, and really looking to make an impact once they've graduated, and it's their time to run things.
Jeff, that's amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, you've added value. I have my notes here. I'd admit while you were talking, when my head was down, I was putting down notes. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.